I never expected that a routine Tuesday morning in Times Square subway station would become the day that would define my strength and reshape my understanding of human dignity. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm 51 years old. I've been riding the labyrinthine New York subway system for over 2 decades, working as a dedicated social worker in Manhattan while living in my modest one-bedroom apartment in Queens. After 23 years of navigating this city's complexities, helping families in crisis, and witnessing both the best and worst of human nature through my profession, I thought I had seen everything this unforgiving metropolis could throw at me. I was devastatingly wrong. The morning started exactly like the thousands that had come before it. I descended into the controlled chaos of Times Square Station at precisely 7:47 a.m., the same time I had maintained religiously every weekday for the past 15 years. The familiar cacophony of urban life surrounded me like a symphony I had grown to love. The piercing screech of train brakes as massive subway cars ground to mechanical halts, the electronic announcements echoing off the grimy tiled walls in multiple languages, the constant shuffle and drumbeat of thousands of commuter feet moving with practiced urgency across worn concrete floors, and the perpetual hum of conversations conducted in dozens of languages from every corner of the globe. I clutched my worn brown leather purse closer to my body as I navigated through the dense crowd, my comfortable black flats making soft, familiar sounds against the platform floor that had been polished smooth by millions of footsteps over the decades. The purse had been a gift from my late mother 5 years ago, and its well-worn exterior told the story of countless journeys through this underground world. Inside, it contained the tools of my trade, case files documenting the struggles of families I was trying to help, business cards from various social services, and the small notebook where I jotted down thoughts and observations about the children whose lives I was privileged to touch. I had gained weight over the past few years, something I was acutely aware of but had learned to accept as part of the natural progression of getting older and dealing with the emotional toll of my demanding profession. My metabolism wasn't what it used to be when I was in my 30s, and the chronic stress of my job working with at-risk families, abused children, and desperate parents often left me seeking comfort in food when I returned home exhausted each evening. I wore a simple black sweater that I had purchased from Target 3 months earlier, paired with dark blue jeans that fit comfortably around my fuller figure, clothes that made me feel confident enough to face another emotionally challenging day of helping families navigate their darkest moments. The downtown platform was already packed with the usual morning rush hour crowd, a diverse tapestry of New Yorkers from every walk of life imaginable. Construction workers in hard hats and reflective vests stood next to Wall Street executives in $1,000 suits, while teachers like myself mingled with students, tourists, and artists, all united in the common goal of getting to their destinations as efficiently as possible. I found my regular spot near the third pillar from the main stairs, a strategic location I had claimed through months of trial and error, perfectly positioned to catch the downtown N train that would carry me to my office in Lower Manhattan. Around me, people engaged in the familiar morning ritual of urban commuting, checking their smartphones for messages that had arrived overnight, sipping coffee from paper cups purchased from the numerous vendors who set up shop in the station's corridors, reading newspapers, both physical and digital, and maintaining that distinctly New York practice of avoiding direct eye contact with strangers while remaining hyper-aware of everything happening in their immediate vicinity. I was mentally reviewing my case files for the day ahead when I first noticed him standing near the turnstiles like a predator surveying his territory. The security guard was a man in his early 30s with a permanent scowl etched deeply across his weathered face, as if life had disappointed him repeatedly and he had decided to take that disappointment out on the world around him. His uniform was meticulously pressed and crisp, his badge polished to a mirror shine, and his posture suggested someone who took his limited authority very seriously, perhaps too seriously. His dark hair was slicked back with gel, and his small dark eyes seemed to constantly scan the crowd for infractions, real or imagined. I had seen him before during my daily commutes over the past few months, though we had never directly interacted. He seemed to derive genuine pleasure from the small amount of power his position afforded him, often stopping commuters for minor infractions like walking too slowly or standing in the wrong area, speaking curtly and dismissively to anyone who approached with questions about train schedules or platform directions. There was something about his demeanor that made people uncomfortable, a barely contained aggression that seemed to simmer just beneath the surface of his professional facade. I was standing quietly in my usual spot, lost in thoughts about the day ahead when disaster struck in the most mundane way possible. I accidentally dropped my Metro card while reaching into my purse to check for my work ID. The small plastic card skittered across the smooth platform floor with a soft scraping sound, coming to rest near a large metal trash can about 10 feet away from where I stood. Embarrassed by my clumsiness and conscious of the dense crowd around me, I hurried to retrieve it, carefully weaving between other commuters and trying not to bump into anyone or cause any disruption to the morning flow of foot traffic. As I bent down to pick up the card, acutely aware of my size and worried about blocking anyone's path, I heard heavy footsteps approaching behind me with obvious intent. The sound of those footsteps, sharp and aggressive against the concrete, made something in my stomach clench with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. "Move it along, lady," came a gruff, irritated voice that cut through the ambient noise of the station like a knife. I turned around to see the security guard standing directly behind me, his arms crossed over his chest in a posture of confrontation and authority. His face was twisted into an expression of disgust and impatience, as if my simple act of retrieving a dropped item was a personal affront to his sensibilities. "This ain't a place to be blocking traffic and holding up honest people trying to get to work." "I'm so sorry," I said quickly, holding up my Metro card to show him what I had been retrieving. "I just dropped this and needed to pick it up. I wasn't trying to block anyone." I tried to keep my voice polite and apologetic, though his unnecessarily harsh tone had already set my nerves on edge. In my profession, I had learned the importance of de-escalating tense situations with calm words and respectful behavior. He looked me up and down with obvious disdain, his small eyes traveling from my graying hair to my comfortable shoes, taking in every detail of my appearance with the kind of critical assessment that made my skin crawl. I saw something ugly and cruel flash across his face, a look that I recognized from my work with troubled individuals, the expression of someone who enjoyed having power over others and took pleasure in making them feel small and worthless. "Yeah. Well, maybe if you weren't so—" He paused deliberately, and in that pregnant moment of silence, I saw the cruelty building behind his eyes like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The platform seemed to grow quieter around us, as if the universe itself was holding its breath for what was about to come. Other commuters began to take notice of the confrontation, their conversations trailing off as they sensed tension in the air. Then he said it. The words that would echo in my mind for days and weeks to come, spoken loud enough for everyone in the immediate vicinity to hear clearly. "Maybe if you weren't such an old, fat pig, you wouldn't be stumbling around, getting in everyone's way like some kind of clumsy cow." The world stopped. Time seemed to freeze as those words hit me like physical blows to my chest and stomach. I felt the blood drain from my face as the cruel syllables registered in my brain, each word landing with the force of a sledgehammer against my self-esteem. Around us, conversations ceased abruptly. People turned to stare with expressions ranging from shock to disgust at what they had just witnessed. A businessman in an expensive charcoal suit stopped mid-phone call, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. A group of college students looked up from their phones with wide, horrified eyes. Even the usual subway musicians seemed to miss a beat in their performances. I stood there completely frozen, my Metro card trembling in my hand like a leaf in a storm. The guard's words hung in the air like toxic smoke, poisoning the space around us and making it difficult to breathe. I felt exposed and vulnerable, as if he had stripped away not just my dignity, but my very right to exist in this public space. The weight of every insecurity I had ever felt about my appearance, every cruel comment I had endured throughout my life, every doubt about my worth as a human being crashed down on me at once like an avalanche of shame and humiliation. "Excuse. Me?" I managed to whisper, though my voice came out as barely more than a breath. My throat felt constricted, as if the words themselves were choking me. "You heard me loud and clear," he said, his voice getting louder and more confident in his cruelty, as if the shock and silence around us was encouraging him to continue his verbal assault. "Old fat pig, maybe lose some weight and you won't be such a clumsy mess disrupting everyone's commute. Some people have important places to be." He crossed his arms again and looked around at the crowd that had gathered, as if inviting them to join in his mockery and validate his cruel assessment of my worth. But something unexpected and beautiful happened in that moment of darkness. Instead of the laughter or agreement he seemed to expect, I saw anger flash across the faces of the strangers around me. These ordinary New Yorkers, people who had been going about their daily routines just moments before, suddenly transformed into defenders of basic human decency. A young woman with vibrant purple hair and multiple piercings stepped forward without hesitation, her voice clear, strong, and righteously indignant. "Are you kidding me right now? Are you seriously talking to another human being like that? That is completely and totally unacceptable." An older gentleman wearing a faded Yankees cap shook his head in visible disgust, his weathered face creased with disapproval. "That's no way to talk to anyone, especially not a lady who's just going about her business and minding her own affairs. You should be ashamed of yourself, son." The businessman who had stopped his phone call approached the guard directly, his expensive shoes clicking against the platform with purpose and determination. "I'm recording this entire interaction," he said firmly, holding up his iPhone with its camera pointed directly at the security guard. "This is clear harassment of a paying customer, and I'm reporting you to the MTA immediately. This behavior is absolutely unacceptable from someone in uniform." More voices joined in, creating a chorus of ordinary New Yorkers who had decided in that moment that they wouldn't stand by silently and watch another human being be humiliated and degraded. But despite their supportive words, I barely heard them through the ringing in my ears. The guard's cruel words continued to reverberate in my head like an echo chamber, each syllable a fresh wound to my already fragile self-esteem. "Old, fat pig." The phrase played on repeat in my mind, drowning out the supportive voices around me like white noise. I felt tears building behind my eyes, hot and shameful, and I knew with absolute certainty that I had to get out of there before I completely broke down in front of all these strangers who were trying so hard to defend me. My train was pulling into the station with its familiar rumble and screech of brakes, and I pushed through the crowd with desperate urgency, desperate to escape this nightmare scenario that had materialized from what should have been an ordinary Tuesday morning. The silver cars of the N train slid to a stop in front of me, and the doors opened with their mechanical hiss, offering me sanctuary from the hostile environment the guard had created. As I boarded the train with shaking legs, I caught one final glimpse of the guard's face through the closing doors. He no longer looked confident or pleased with himself. The crowd's immediate and vocal reaction had clearly caught him completely off guard, and I could see uncertainty and perhaps even fear creeping into his expression as he realized that his cruel behavior had been witnessed and condemned by multiple people. Several commuters were now openly filming him with their phones, their devices pointed in his direction like electronic accusations. I found an empty seat near the back of the car and stared out the window as the train pulled away from Times Square station, watching the platform and the people on it disappear into the darkness of the tunnel. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I had never been spoken to like that before in my entire life, especially not in public, especially not by someone in a position of authority who was supposed to help keep people safe and maintain order. The words echoed in my mind throughout the rest of my commute, repeating endlessly like a broken record. Old, fat pig. Each repetition felt like a fresh slap across my face, reminding me of every cruel comment I had ever received about my appearance, every doubt I had ever harbored about my worth as a person, every insecurity that I thought I had learned to manage over the years. By the time I reached my office building in Lower Manhattan, I was emotionally drained and carrying the weight of that humiliation like a heavy stone lodged permanently in my chest. I sat at my desk that morning, staring at the stack of case files that demanded my immediate attention, but my mind kept returning obsessively to the guard's words, like a tongue probing a painful tooth. Old, fat pig. The phrase seemed to echo in the relative quiet of my small office, where I usually found peace and purpose among the family photos and children's drawings that covered my walls like colorful testimony to the positive impact I tried to make in the world. These cherished mementos of the lives I had helped improve over the years, birthday cards from former clients, crayon drawings from children I had helped find safe homes, thank you notes from grateful parents, suddenly felt meaningless and hollow in the face of such casual, devastating cruelty. My colleague Janet knocked softly on my door around 10 o'clock, her timing impeccable as always. She was a few years younger than me, with kind hazel eyes and an almost supernatural intuitive sense for when someone in our office was struggling emotionally. We had worked together for 8 challenging years, sharing difficult cases and supporting each other through the emotional minefield that was social work in New York City. She understood better than most the toll our profession could take on one's psyche and self-worth. "Sarah, you look really upset about something," she said gently, settling into the uncomfortable metal chair across from my desk that we had salvaged from a school that was being renovated. "What's going on? You seem distracted, and you've been staring at the same page for 20 minutes. I hadn't planned to tell anyone about the subway incident, thinking foolishly that I could just push through the emotional trauma and move on with my day as if nothing had happened. But as soon as she asked the question with such genuine concern in her voice, the words came pouring out of me like water from a broken dam. I described the morning's events in excruciating detail, watching her expression grow increasingly horrified and indignant as I recounted the guard's unprovoked verbal attack and the public humiliation I had endured. "He actually said that to you? Called you those names in front of everyone?" Janet's voice rose with righteous indignation, her usually calm demeanor cracking to reveal the fierce protective instincts that made her such an effective advocate for our clients. "Sarah, that's not just rude behavior or a bad attitude. That's outright harassment and abuse of authority. That's completely unacceptable behavior from anyone, but especially from someone in uniform who's supposed to serve the public." "I know it was wrong," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper as I struggled to maintain my composure. "But what can I realistically do about it? File some kind of formal complaint? Write a letter to someone? Who's going to care about the hurt feelings of a middle-aged woman who got her feelings hurt on the subway? They'll probably just dismiss it as oversensitivity or say, 'I misunderstood what happened.'" Janet leaned forward in her chair, her expression serious and determined. "You'd be surprised how seriously the MTA takes complaints about employee conduct, especially when it involves harassment and abuse of customers. This isn't just about hurt feelings, Sarah. This is about basic human dignity and civil rights. And you said people were filming the whole thing?" I nodded, remembering with vivid clarity the businessman with his phone raised like a weapon, the steely determination in his voice when he announced he was recording the interaction. Several people had their phones out and pointed at him. They seemed really angry about what he said to me. Complete strangers were defending me. "Good," Janet said firmly, her voice filled with conviction. "Because what happened to you wasn't just morally wrong, it was a clear violation of basic human decency and probably several official policies. That man is supposed to serve the public and maintain order, not abuse innocent people who are just trying to go about their daily lives." As the day progressed slowly and painfully, I found myself obsessively thinking about Janet's words and encouragement. Maybe she was right about pursuing some kind of formal action. Maybe this wasn't something I should just accept passively and try to forget about. But the idea of filing a formal complaint felt overwhelming and daunting. I imagined having to relive the humiliation over and over again, having to repeat those cruel, degrading words to strangers who might judge me harshly or dismiss my concerns as trivial complaints from an oversensitive woman. When I finally got home that evening to my small but comfortable Queens apartment, exhausted and emotionally drained, from trying to focus on work while processing the trauma, I did something I rarely did. I opened my laptop and looked at social media. I wasn't much of a Facebook or Instagram user, preferring to spend my limited free time reading novels or working in the small garden I maintained on my fire escape. But curiosity and a growing sense that I needed to understand the full scope of what had happened got the better of me, and I searched tentatively for any mention of the morning's incident. What I found completely shocked me and changed everything. The businessman who had been filming had posted the video on Twitter, and it was spreading rapidly across the platform like wildfire. The caption read, "Disgusting, unprofessional behavior from MTA security guard at Times Square this morning. This woman was just picking up her dropped Metro card when he verbally assaulted her with body-shaming slurs. This is not okay, not acceptable. MTA accountability, stop harassment, body shaming, public transport safety." I watched the video with a mixture of horror and fascination, seeing myself from an outside perspective for the first time. There I was, looking small and vulnerable as I bent down to pick up my card, moving carefully to avoid bumping into other commuters. There was the guard, his voice clear and unmistakably cruel as he delivered his devastating insult with obvious pleasure. And there was the immediate visceral reaction from the crowd: shock, anger, disgust, and people stepping forward without hesitation to defend a complete stranger. The video had already been viewed tens of thousands of times, and the comments section was filled with overwhelming outrage on my behalf. People were calling for the guard to be fired immediately, sharing their own stories of harassment and discrimination, and praising the bystanders who had spoken up courageously. Someone had even managed to identify the guard by name, Officer David Kellerman, and people were tagging the official MTA Twitter account relentlessly, demanding immediate action and accountability. I scrolled through comment after comment of support from complete strangers, each message like a small balm for my wounded spirit. This absolutely breaks my heart. No human being deserves to be treated like this, ever. That guard should be deeply ashamed of himself. Fire him immediately and publicly. The people who stood up for her give me hope for humanity's future. I hope this brave woman knows she has thousands of people supporting her right now. This is why we need to speak up when we witness harassment. Silence enables abusers. I'm crying watching this. The cruelty is heartbreaking, but the support from strangers is beautiful. Reading these responses from people around the world, I felt something profound shift inside my chest. The shame and humiliation that had been crushing me all day began to transform into something else entirely: determination, resolve, and a growing sense that maybe I wasn't as alone and powerless as I had felt. These complete strangers had witnessed my lowest, most vulnerable moment and responded with kindness, outrage, and fierce advocacy on my behalf. Maybe Janet was right. Maybe this was worth fighting for. That night, I called my sister Maria in California, something I did every week but had been debating whether to mention the incident during our regular conversation. Maria was 3 years older than me and had always been fiercely protective of me since we were children growing up in a rough neighborhood in Brooklyn. When I described what had happened in halting, emotional words, she was silent for a long, tense moment. "Sarah," she finally said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger that reminded me of our mother when someone had wronged one of her children. "You absolutely cannot let this go. You cannot just accept this treatment and move on like nothing happened. That man humiliated you in public, and from what you're telling me about this video, it sounds like he's probably done this before to other people who didn't have the support you're getting. You have to file a formal complaint. But what if nothing happens? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if they just dismiss it or find some way to blame me for what happened? What if they say I was overreacting or being too sensitive? Then at least you'll know you stood up for yourself and tried to create change, Maria replied, with the fierce determination that had carried her through her own battles in life. And from what you're telling me about this video and all the support you're getting, it sounds like you have plenty of witnesses and evidence. Don't let that bastard get away with treating you or anyone else like that. After we hung up, I spent hours researching the process for filing complaints with the MTA, diving deep into their official website and reading through policies and procedures. The process seemed relatively straightforward. There was an online form specifically for reporting employee misconduct and a dedicated phone number for making verbal complaints. But actually taking that step felt like crossing a line I had never crossed before in my entire life. I had always been someone who avoided conflict whenever possible, who preferred to handle problems quietly and privately rather than making waves or drawing attention to myself. This would require me to make noise, to demand attention, to insist publicly that my dignity and worth as a human being mattered. I made my final decision around midnight, sitting in my small kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea and looking at the city lights twinkling outside my window. I would file the complaint first thing in the morning. As I prepared for bed, I thought about all the students and families I had worked with over the years who had faced bullying, harassment, and abuse. I had always encouraged them to speak up, to report it, to refuse to suffer in silence. Now it was time to take my own advice and practice what I had been preaching. The next morning, I woke up with new resolve coursing through my veins like caffeine. Before I even made my coffee or checked my email, I called the MTA complaint hotline. The woman who answered was professional and genuinely sympathetic as I described the incident in detail, her voice conveying both concern and a sense that she took these matters seriously. She took down all the pertinent details with careful precision: the guard's name, the exact location within Times Square station, the approximate time of the incident, and a complete description of what had occurred. She also asked specifically if I had any witnesses or evidence that could support my account. Actually, I said, feeling a surge of confidence, there's a video of the entire incident on social media that's been viewed by thousands of people. It shows everything that happened. That's excellent, she said with obvious satisfaction. Video evidence will definitely strengthen the investigation significantly. We take these complaints very seriously, especially when there's clear documentation of inappropriate conduct. Someone from our internal affairs department will be in touch with you within 48 hours to begin a formal investigation. After filing the official complaint, I did something else that surprised even me. I created my own Twitter account and responded directly to the viral video that had sparked so much conversation. My hands shook as I carefully typed, "This is me in the video. Thank you to everyone who stood up for me that day, and to all of you showing such incredible support online. No one should have to endure this kind of treatment. I filed a formal complaint with the MTA and hope this leads to positive change." The response was immediate, overwhelming, and unlike anything I had ever experienced. Within just a few hours, my tweet had hundreds of replies offering support, sharing similar experiences, and encouraging me to pursue justice. News outlets began reaching out through direct messages, asking if I would be willing to be interviewed about my experience. Advocacy groups focused on workplace harassment, body shaming, and civil rights contacted me, offering their resources and support. I was no longer just Sarah Martinez, the quiet social worker from Queens who had been humiliated on a subway platform. I had become a symbol of something much larger: the right to exist in public spaces without fear of abuse, the importance of speaking up against harassment wherever it occurs, and the incredible power of ordinary people to demand better treatment for each other and create meaningful change in the world. 2 days after filing my formal complaint, I received a call that marked the beginning of what would become the most challenging and ultimately empowering experience of my adult life. Detective Maria Santos from the MTA's Internal Affairs Department introduced herself with a voice that was both professional and warm, immediately putting me at ease despite my nervousness about the entire process. She explained in detail that they were taking my case very seriously, especially given the unprecedented public attention it had received and the clear video evidence that documented every moment of the incident. Ms. Martinez, we'd like to schedule a formal interview with you to get your complete statement and gather any additional information that might be relevant to our investigation, she said, her tone conveying both authority and genuine concern for my welfare. We're also in the process of reaching out to all the witnesses who were present that morning and willing to cooperate with our investigation. The video that's been circulating online is extremely helpful as evidence, but we want to get the full picture from everyone who was involved or witnessed what occurred. We arranged to meet at her office in Lower Manhattan the following afternoon, a timing that would allow me to take a half-day off from work without disrupting my scheduled meetings with clients. As I hung up the phone, I felt an unexpected mixture of nervousness and vindication coursing through my body. The system was actually responding to my complaint. Someone with real authority and power was taking my experience seriously and treating it as a legitimate case worthy of investigation. That evening, my phone rang again, and I was surprised to hear an unfamiliar male voice on the other end. It was Jake Morrison, the businessman who had filmed the incident and posted it online, setting in motion the chain of events that had led to this investigation. He had somehow obtained my phone number through a mutual connection and wanted to personally offer his support for the investigation process. Ms. Martinez, I hope you don't mind me calling you directly, he said, his voice carrying a warmth and sincerity that immediately put me at ease. I wanted you to know that I've already spoken extensively with the MTA investigators and given them my complete statement about what I witnessed. What that guard did to you was absolutely inexcusable and completely beyond the bounds of acceptable behavior, and I'm genuinely glad you're pursuing this matter through official channels. Jake went on to explain his background and why he had felt compelled to act. He had worked in corporate human resources for 15 years and had handled numerous cases of workplace harassment and discrimination. In my professional opinion, what he did constitutes a clear and egregious violation of the MTA's Code of Conduct and basic standards of human decency. He created a hostile environment for you as a paying customer, and he did it while representing a public agency. There absolutely should be serious consequences for this kind of behavior. Over the next few days, I heard from several other witnesses who had been present during the incident, each reaching out to offer their support and confirm that they had also been contacted by investigators. The young woman with purple hair turned out to be Emma Chen, a graduate student at Columbia University studying social justice and public policy, who had given a detailed statement to investigators about what she had witnessed. The older gentleman in the Yankees cap was Robert Williams, a retired teacher from the Bronx who told me he was absolutely disgusted by the way that young man spoke to you and treated you like you were less than human. Each conversation with these strangers-turned-allies reinforced my decision to pursue the complaint and seek justice. These people had been moved enough by what they witnessed to come forward and actively support me, even though it would have been much easier for them to simply move on with their lives and forget about the incident. Their willingness to get involved and speak up gave me strength and courage I didn't know I possessed. The formal interview with Detective Santos took place in a small, sterile office in a government building near City Hall, the kind of institutional space that seemed designed to make people feel both important and intimidated simultaneously. She was a woman in her mid-40s with prematurely graying hair and intelligent, kind eyes that suggested she had seen plenty of difficult cases throughout her career, but had somehow managed to maintain her faith in the possibility of justice. She recorded our conversation on a digital device and took detailed handwritten notes as I recounted the incident from beginning to end, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific details. Ms. Martinez, I want you to know that we've already conducted our initial interview with Officer Kellerman, she said, after I finished providing my complete account of what had occurred. His version of events differs significantly from yours and from what we can clearly observe in the video evidence that's been provided to us. What did he claim happened? I asked, dreading the answer, but needing to understand how he was attempting to justify his behavior. He claims that you were deliberately blocking foot traffic during rush hour and became verbally aggressive and belligerent when he politely asked you to move to a different area, Detective Santos explained, shaking her head slightly as she spoke. He says his comments were made in direct response to your allegedly aggressive behavior toward him and were intended to de-escalate what he characterized as a confrontational situation. The audacity of his lies took my breath away. But that's completely false. The video shows exactly what happened. You're absolutely right, Detective Santos said firmly. The video evidence clearly contradicts his statement in every significant detail. We can clearly see that you were polite, apologetic, and non-confrontational throughout the entire interaction. There's absolutely no evidence of any aggressive behavior on your part whatsoever. In fact, your body language throughout the incident suggests someone who was trying to avoid conflict, not create it. She pulled out a manila folder and showed me several still images that had been captured from the viral video at different moments during the incident. In each photograph, my body language was clearly non-threatening and defensive. I was bent over picking up my card, then standing quietly with my hands at my sides as the guard approached me with obvious aggressive intent. Meanwhile, his posture, in every single frame, suggested dominance, aggression, and someone who was enjoying exercising power over another person. We've also discovered some troubling information about Officer Kellerman's employment history, Detective Santos continued, her expression growing more serious. This isn't his first incident involving inappropriate behavior toward female passengers. We found 2 previous formal complaints filed against him over the past 18 months for similar conduct, though neither of those cases had video evidence like yours does. This revelation hit me like a physical blow to my stomach. The realization that other women had experienced similar treatment from this man and that he had apparently faced no meaningful consequences for his previous behavior filled me with a burning anger that surprised me with its intensity. How many other innocent people had he humiliated and degraded? How many had chosen not to report it because they thought no one would believe them or take their concerns seriously? What happens now? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. We're conducting a comprehensive investigation that includes interviews with all witnesses, review of any available security footage from the station, and a thorough examination of Officer Kellerman's complete employment record and performance evaluations, Detective Santos explained. Based on what we've uncovered so far, I fully expect there will be significant disciplinary action. The only question at this point is how severe those consequences will be. She went on to explain that the possible consequences ranged from suspension and mandatory retraining to complete termination of employment, depending on the final findings of the investigation. She also mentioned that the case had attracted attention from the MTA's senior management team, who were deeply concerned about the negative publicity and the potential impact on the agency's public reputation and ridership. As I left the interview and walked back through the bustling streets of Lower Manhattan, I felt a complex mixture of progress and exhaustion. The process of seeking justice was proving to be far more emotionally draining than I had anticipated. Every time I had to recount the incident in detail, I relived the humiliation and anger all over again, like reopening a wound that was trying to heal. But I also felt a growing sense of empowerment and purpose. I was no longer just a passive victim of harassment. I was someone who refused to accept unacceptable behavior and was actively working to create change. That weekend, I received an unexpected call from Rachel Goldman, an investigative reporter. From the New York Post, who had been following the story since the video first went viral, she asked if I would be willing to do an extensive, on-the-record interview about my experience and the broader societal issue of harassment on public transportation. I know this might feel overwhelming, and I understand if you're not ready for this level of exposure, she said with genuine sensitivity in her voice. But your case has really resonated with people across the country and even internationally. We've received dozens of emails from readers sharing their own experiences with harassment on public transit. Your willingness to speak up and fight back has encouraged others to come forward with their stories and seek justice for themselves. I agreed to meet with her at a quiet coffee shop in Midtown Manhattan, a neutral location where we could talk, without interruption. Rachel was younger than I had expected, probably in her early 30s, with short dark hair and an intensity that suggested she took her journalistic responsibilities very seriously. She had clearly done extensive research. She knew about the viral video, the ongoing MTA investigation, the witness statements, and even some of the social media response to my case from around the world. What I'm most interested in exploring, she said as she set up her digital recorder between us, is how this experience has affected you personally on a human level. Beyond the official complaint and the investigation process, how has this incident changed your daily life, your sense of safety, your relationship with public spaces? It was a profound question that I had been grappling with myself since the incident occurred. The honest answer was that the verbal attack had shaken my confidence and sense of security in ways I was still trying to fully understand and process. I found myself more self-conscious in public spaces, more acutely aware of how others might perceive my appearance, more hypervigilant about potential threats or hostile behavior from people in positions of authority. At the same time, the overwhelming support from strangers had also made me feel more connected to my community and more hopeful about human nature than I had ever felt before. I think what surprised me most, I told Rachel thoughtfully, is discovering how many people have reached out to share similar experiences. Women, mostly, but some men too. People who were mocked for their weight, their age, their disability, their accent, their appearance, their economic status. It's made me realize that what happened to me wasn't unique or isolated. It's part of a much larger, more systemic pattern of how we sometimes treat each other in this city and in society generally. Rachel nodded as she took detailed notes, clearly engaged with the broader implications of my story. Do you think your case will actually change anything meaningful, or is this just temporary attention that will fade away? I considered the question carefully, drawing on my professional experience working within systems that were often resistant to change. I hope it will make other people in positions of authority think twice before they abuse that authority to hurt innocent people. And I hope it will encourage more bystanders to speak up when they witness harassment, the way those amazing strangers did for me. Sometimes it takes one person refusing to accept the unacceptable to create a ripple effect that leads to broader change. The article was published the following Tuesday, accompanied by a professional photograph of me sitting in the same coffee shop where we had conducted the interview. The headline read, "Subway Harassment Victim Fights Back. No one deserves this. Treatment." The piece included detailed quotes from several of the witnesses, an update on the status of the MTA investigation, and a sidebar featuring statistics about harassment on public transportation systems across the United States. Reading. My own words in print felt surreal and somewhat overwhelming. 6 months earlier, I had been living a quiet, anonymous life, going about my daily routine without attracting any attention or notoriety. Now I was the subject of news articles, social media discussions, and public policy conversations. It was both overwhelming and strangely liberating. I had found my voice in a way I never expected and discovered reserves of strength and courage I didn't know existed within me. 3 weeks after my intensive interview with Detective Santos on a gray Thursday morning that I will remember for the rest of my life, I received the phone call I had been anxiously waiting for. Detective Santos's voice carried a note of satisfaction as she delivered news that would change everything. The MTA's comprehensive investigation was complete, and Officer David Kellerman was being terminated from his position effective immediately. The decision had been made unanimously by the agency's disciplinary review board after carefully considering all the evidence, including the viral video, multiple witness statements, his previous complaint history, and his own contradictory testimony. During the investigation, Ms. Martinez, I wanted to personally inform you of the outcome before you heard about it through other channels, Detective Santos said, her professional demeanor unable to completely mask what sounded like genuine satisfaction with the result. The review board found that Officer Kellerman violated multiple serious sections of the MTA's Code of Conduct, including harassment of a passenger, conduct unbecoming an officer, abuse of authority, and providing deliberately false statements. During an official investigation, his termination is immediate, final, and will be noted permanently in his employment record. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair as the magnitude of the news began to sink in. After weeks of uncertainty, sleepless nights, and reliving the traumatic incident over and over again through interviews and statements, justice had finally been served in the most complete way possible. The man who had humiliated me so publicly and cruelly was facing real, meaningful consequences for his actions. More importantly, he would no longer be in a position of authority where he could treat other innocent people the way he had treated me. There's even more positive news, Detective Santos continued, her voice warming with what seemed like genuine pride in the outcome. Your case has prompted the MTA to implement several significant policy changes. They're instituting new mandatory training for all security personnel about appropriate interactions with the public, establishing a zero-tolerance policy for harassment of any kind, and creating a new rapid response system for investigating complaints about employee misconduct. Your courage in coming forward has created changes that will benefit countless other people. After hanging up the phone, I sat in my quiet apartment for several long minutes, processing the complex emotions that were washing over me in waves. Relief was the strongest feeling. Relief that I had been believed completely, that the system had worked as it was supposed to, and that Kellerman would no longer be in a position to treat other passengers the way he had treated me. But there was also a profound sense of sadness about the entire situation. I wished desperately that none of it had ever happened, that a simple act of picking up a dropped MetroCard hadn't led to such a painful and public ordeal. My phone began ringing almost immediately after I hung up with Detective Santos. Word of Kellerman's termination had somehow leaked to the media faster than I had expected, and reporters from multiple outlets wanted my reaction to the news. I decided to make a carefully considered statement to Rachel Goldman at the New York Post, since she had covered the story fairly and sensitively from the very beginning. I'm deeply relieved that the MTA took this matter seriously and conducted a thorough, professional investigation, I told her, choosing my words carefully. Officer Kellerman's termination sends a clear message that harassment and abuse of authority have no place in our public transportation system or anywhere else in our society. But more importantly, I hope this outcome encourages other people who have experienced harassment to speak up and seek justice. And I hope it reminds everyone in positions of authority that their actions have consequences. The news of Kellerman's firing spread rapidly through social media platforms and traditional news outlets. The original video, which had been viewed over 1 million times by that point, started circulating again with updates about the final outcome. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with people expressing satisfaction that justice had been served and praising me for pursuing the complaint despite the personal and emotional cost involved. But perhaps the most meaningful and unexpected response came from a source I never could have anticipated. That evening, as I was preparing dinner in my small kitchen, I received a handwritten letter delivered to my home address by regular mail. The return address was unfamiliar, but when I opened the envelope with trembling hands, I found a note written in careful handwriting from David Kellerman himself. Ms. Martinez, the letter began, and I could feel my heart rate increase as I read his words. I know I have absolutely no right to contact you after what I put you through, and I understand if you choose to throw this letter away without reading it. But I wanted to try to apologize for my inexcusable behavior and explain that losing my job has forced me to confront some very ugly truths about myself and the way I've been treating people throughout my life. The letter continued for 2 full pages, and as I read, I was surprised by what seemed to be genuine remorse and self-reflection. What I said to you was cruel, wrong, and completely unjustifiable. I realize now that I was taking out my own frustrations and insecurities on innocent people who didn't deserve that treatment. I'm deeply sorry for the pain and humiliation I caused you, and I don't expect or deserve your forgiveness. I wanted you to know that I realize how badly I failed as both a professional and a human being. He went on to explain that he was seeking professional counseling to address his issues with anger and his tendency to abuse whatever small amount of power he was given. I hope someday to become the kind of person who builds others up instead of tearing them down. What happened between us was a wake-up call that I desperately needed, even though I caused you tremendous pain in the process. I read the letter several times that evening, surprised by its apparent sincerity and the depth of self-reflection it contained. It didn't undo the humiliation he had caused me or erase the trauma of that morning, but it suggested that perhaps some genuine good might come from this entire ordeal if it led him to seriously examine and change his behavior patterns. The fact that he had taken the time to write a thoughtful letter rather than simply moving on with his life gave me a small measure of hope that people really could change when faced with the consequences of their actions. 2 months after Kellerman's termination, I received an invitation that would mark another important milestone in my unexpected journey toward becoming an advocate for dignity and respect in public spaces. The New York Civil Liberties Union was hosting a public forum on harassment in public spaces, and they asked me to be one of the featured speakers. The event was scheduled to be held at a community center in Manhattan, and they expected about 100 people to attend, including other harassment victims, activists, advocacy groups, and MTA officials. Standing at the podium that evening, looking out at an audience of engaged, concerned faces, I felt nervous, but more determined than I had ever felt in my life. I had never considered myself a public speaker or an activist, but I had learned through this experience that I had something important and meaningful to say, and that my voice could make a difference in other people's lives. 6 months ago, I was just another anonymous face in the crowd at Times Square Station, I began, my voice growing stronger as I spoke. I was a middle-aged woman going to work, invisible to most people around me, living a quiet life and minding my own business. But in one terrible moment, I became visible in the worst possible way, as a target for someone else's cruelty, prejudice, and abuse of power. I went on to describe not just the incident itself, but the entire aftermath, the support from strangers, the investigation process, the media attention, and the eventual consequences for Kellerman. What I learned from this experience is that silence in the face of harassment doesn't protect us or make the problem go away. It enables it and allows it to continue. When we speak up, when we refuse to accept unacceptable behavior, when we demand better treatment for ourselves and others, we create the possibility for real, meaningful change. I talked at length about the crucial importance of bystander intervention, praising the people who had spoken up for me in that moment. When I was most vulnerable, those strangers didn't know anything about me, but they recognized an injustice happening right in front of them and decided to act. They could have just looked away, minded their own business, and continued with their commutes. Instead, they chose to stand up for a fellow human being. That's the kind of community we need to build, one where we look out for each other and refuse to let harassment and abuse go unchallenged. The applause when I finished speaking was warm, sustained, and deeply moving. During the question and answer session that followed, several people shared their own experiences with harassment in public spaces and thanked me for giving them the courage to speak up about their situations and seek justice. One young woman said that my case had directly inspired her to report a supervisor who had been making inappropriate comments about her weight and appearance at her workplace. After the forum ended, I was approached by Maria Elena Rodriguez, a civil rights lawyer who specialized in harassment and discrimination cases. She had been following my story closely from the beginning and wanted to discuss the possibility of filing a civil lawsuit against both Kellerman personally and the MTA as an institution for the harassment and emotional distress I had suffered. "You have an extremely strong case from a legal standpoint," she explained as we talked in a quiet corner of the community center. "The video evidence is absolutely clear and undeniable. The MTA's own investigation supports your account completely, and you've suffered demonstrable harm to your reputation, emotional well-being, and sense of security. A civil suit could result in significant financial compensation for your suffering and would send an even stronger message about the real-world consequences of harassment." I thanked Maria Elena for her interest and expertise, but told her I needed time to carefully consider whether pursuing a civil case was the right path forward for me. The criminal complaint and MTA investigation had been emotionally exhausting and had taken a significant toll on my mental health and daily life. I wasn't sure I had the emotional energy or stamina for another lengthy legal battle, especially one that would likely be even more public and contentious. More importantly, I felt that the main goals I had set out to achieve when I first decided to file the complaint had largely been accomplished. Kellerman had faced serious consequences for his actions. The MTA had implemented meaningful policy changes in response to my case, and the public attention had sparked important conversations about harassment and dignity in public spaces. Sometimes, I reflected, justice doesn't require extracting every possible pound of flesh. Sometimes it's enough to create change and prevent future harm. A full year later, as I sit in my apartment writing these words and reflecting on the entire experience, I can look back on that terrible morning at Times Square with a complex mixture of pain and pride. The pain comes from remembering the deep humiliation and the way those cruel words made me feel about myself as a human being. Those scars may never completely heal, and I still sometimes hear his voice in my head during moments of self-doubt. But the pride comes from knowing that I found the courage to fight back, to demand better treatment, and to create meaningful change that has benefited countless other people who use public transportation. I refused to accept the unacceptable, and in doing so, I discovered reserves of strength and determination I never knew I possessed. I still take the subway to work every morning, though I now use a different entrance to Times Square Station. Partly for practical reasons, but partly because I'm not quite ready to return to the exact spot where the incident occurred. The new security guards I encounter are consistently professional and courteous, and I like to think that my case played a meaningful role in that improvement. The mandatory training programs that were implemented as a result of my complaint are ongoing, and I've been invited to speak to several groups of MTA employees about the importance of treating all passengers with dignity and respect. I've received hundreds of letters and emails from people around the world who said my story inspired them to report harassment they had experienced or witnessed. Teachers have used the viral video in classes about bystander intervention and standing up for others. Social workers like myself have shared my story with clients who were struggling with whether to report abuse they had suffered. The viral video that started this entire journey has now been viewed over 5 million times across various social media platforms, and it has become something of a case study in bystander intervention. The power of social media to hold people accountable for their actions and the importance of speaking up against harassment wherever it occurs. I occasionally still receive messages from people who have just discovered the story, thanking me for my courage and sharing their own experiences with discrimination and harassment. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I would become an accidental advocate for dignity and respect in public spaces, that I would be speaking at forums and conferences, that my story would inspire policy changes and help other people find the courage to stand up for themselves, I would never have believed them. But sometimes life takes us on journeys we never planned or expected. And sometimes those unexpected journeys teach us the most important lessons about who we really are and what we're capable of achieving. Sometimes standing up for ourselves teaches us that we're far stronger, braver, and more resilient than we ever imagined. Sometimes refusing to accept the unacceptable changes not just our own lives, but the lives of countless others who come after us. The teenage students I sometimes speak to at school assemblies about bullying and harassment often ask me if I regret pursuing the complaint against Officer Kellerman, if I wish I had just tried to forget about what happened and move on with my life. My answer is always the same, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I deeply regret that the incident happened. At all, I regret that such cruelty exists in the world, but I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret demanding justice. I don't regret using my voice to create change. Everyone deserves to be treated with basic human dignity and respect, regardless of their age, size, appearance, or any other characteristic. When we accept less than that, when we allow ourselves or others to be diminished and dehumanized, we make the world a little bit darker for everyone. But when we stand up, when we speak out, when we refuse to let harassment and abuse go unchallenged, we make the world a little bit brighter and safer for all of us. David Kellerman never contacted me again after that one heartfelt letter, but I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he had indeed followed through on his promise to seek counseling and was working at a warehouse in New Jersey, apparently treating his co-workers with much more respect than he had shown to subway passengers. I hope he learned something meaningful from our encounter and that he continues to remember that behind every person he meets is a complete human being deserving of dignity and respect. As for me, I continue my work as a social worker, helping families navigate crisis and find stability in their lives. But I also speak publicly about harassment, dignity, and the importance of standing up for ourselves and each other. I've learned that my voice matters, that my dignity is worth defending, and that ordinary people have extraordinary power to create positive change when they refuse to accept the unacceptable. The morning I was called an old, fat pig in Times Square Station was unquestionably one of the worst mornings of my entire life, but it was also the beginning of an unexpected journey that taught me the true meaning of courage, community, and justice. It showed me that strangers can become allies, that speaking up can create change, and that even the most painful experiences can ultimately lead to something meaningful and important. And for that transformation, for that growth, for that discovery of my own strength and the kindness of others, I am unexpectedly and profoundly grateful. If this story has moved you in any way, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like so you don't miss any of our stories. Your support helps us continue sharing these important experiences that remind us of our shared humanity and the power we all have to create positive change in the world.